ancestors worked really hard at making a living, and there wasn't much to spare. So if they wanted new clothes, plain or fancy, they made them. Simple as that. The result was often beautiful things that were passed down from generation to generation. Without really thinking about it, they were making heirlooms. Maybe we don't have time to hand-stitch everything like in the old days, but we can still make things for our families that are a little better and a little nicer than what you could buy. And they will become real treasures to our descendants someday. That's very satisfying.
Heirlooms by Design with Sharon LaMonaco is sponsored by Capital Imports, your passport to fine lace, embroideries, and fabrics. And by Quilts Plus, your authorized Bernina dealer. Nothing sews like a Bernina. Nothing. Now, here's Sharon.
Hi, I'm Sharon LaMonaco. Thanks for joining us today on Heirlooms by Design. Today our project is going to be cathedral window quilting. This is kind of a new twist on an old style of quilt. In the past, cathedral window has been done entirely by hand, and today we're going to do it by machine. With our new machines and the invisible nylon thread, we can create a stitch that looks very much like it's done by hand. So let me show you a few of our items. This quilt behind me was done entirely by machine, and this particular technique was one that is similar to the traditional technique in the way it's constructed. The little piece that I have in my lap was done entirely different, and this is the technique that we're going to be using today. This is done by cutting some squares and placing them on a background, very much like we do with our regular quilting. There's a lot of ways that you can use this. I have over here a armchair caddy, and this has some little pockets in it so that you can put your sewing necessities, and this weighted piece in the middle holds it onto the armchair and acts as a pincushion. We also have a great sewing tote, and this one again is done using sewing the squares onto the background fabric. My vest also has the cathedral window pieces on the front, and this again is done using the squares sewn onto the background fabric and then quilted. Now traditionally, cathedral window is not quilted. The pieces are just folded in various directions and sewn together by hand, and we don't have any quilt batting. And the technique that we're going to learn today, we're going to use batting, and it's going to be actually a quilted quilt.
Sharon will be back right after this.
Sunny King Honda, home of Civics, Preludes, and Accords, the #1 selling car in the USA, is where you'll find the Civic Del Sol. It's Honda's new open-top automobile. Sunny King Honda, one of the nation's top 40 dealers in the Total Satisfaction Index, offers to you a veteran, experienced, and trained sales staff with 67 years of Honda expertise in helping you make the right choice. Combine their knowledge with 50 years of experience in the parts and service department, and you won't find a better deal anywhere. Nobody walks at Sunny King Honda.
I'm a wheel watcher. Wheel is America's game.
Care to solve the puzzle?
I'm a wheel watcher. I'm a wheel watcher. Everybody plays. I'm a wheel watcher. I'm a wheel watcher. It's America's game.
We're going to begin by cutting our bias squares. In this particular technique, the area here that's blue are squares that are cut on the bias. These are 4.5-inch squares, and I'm going to begin by showing you how to fold your fabric to easily cut 4.5-inch bias squares. I have a ½ yard of fabric here, and the first thing I'm going to do is to find the bias edge, which is this edge across here. Now I'm going to turn it so that our bias edge is lined up with one of the lines on our cutting board, and continue to fold. I'm just folding this down so that it gets to be a little bit more of a manageable size. Now, because I'm making some placemats, I'm only using a half a yard of fabric. If you were making a full-size quilt, you would be using a lot more yardage, and you would just keep on folding forever. Now, the first thing I want to do is be sure that my bias edge is lined up right along this edge, right on this line. We're going to use these lines to help us with the cutting. First thing I'm going to do is cut off this little tail right here. Now I will continue to cut my 4.5 inch bias squares. And I'm just lining up my ruler with the grid on my cutting board. Once we get all of these strips cut, then we'll stack them on top of each other and cut out our squares. Now that we have our squares cut, we're ready to begin the marking. There's a lot of different marking pencils on the market, and you need to choose one to go with the color of your fabric so that you can see it. This particular one has white, yellow, pink, and blue in it. These are chalk markers by Clover. Also, I like to use the silver pencil. This gets a nice sharp point, and it's real easy to mark. Today, we're going to be using a black pen, and that's mainly so that you can see it on TV, so that you can see what I'm doing. Please don't use this black pen on your actual quilt. We need to mark a 1/2 inch from our cut edge. So just place your see-through ruler and mark with your pencil a 1/2 inch all the way around. We're going to be pressing the edges of the squares over 1/4 inch. Now, if we marked 1/4 inch, we wouldn't be able to see where that line is. So we're going to mark it at 1/2 inch. And then we'll be folding the cut edge of the fabric right up to the line that we've marked. Please be very accurate with your marking, and you're going to need to be equally as accurate with your pressing. The next thing I'm going to do is to trim the corners. And I'm just trimming this across where we've marked. We want to get rid of this excess fabric that's on the corners because we don't want to have too much bulk. We need to have as little fabric in here with the method that we're going to use to fold these corners over as possible. And we're just going to continue to cut and mark these, and then we'll be ready to press. And we'll be right back with our iron.
Heirlooms by Design will return in a moment.
Forgotten because the church contained not only a blushing bride, but a very pale dead body.
We had the major crime squad and the police lines.
Mary Beth's wedding was interrupted by an earthquake.
Well, the steeple fell off our church.
And Flor was just itching to get on with her ceremony.
The night before the wedding, I realized I was allergic to my dress.
Brides who say, my wedding day was a nightmare. Next, Sally.
Tomorrow morning at 8 on TV 40.
Be cooler than the rest. Be cruising with the best.
Are you 10 or older and tired of doing the same things over and over? Well, the Boy Scouts don't have that problem.
A new way of hanging around. It's getting high, high off the ground. You can do it.
To find out how you can become a Boy Scout, call your local Boy Scout council.
We do it, the Boy Scouts.
Now we have our squares cut and marked, and we're ready to do the pressing. We need to fold this cut edge to our line that we've drawn. And I'm using my little bent tweezers so that I don't burn my fingers. And we're just going to press this cut edge right up to that line that we've drawn. It's nice to be able to see the line. That's why we drew it at 1/2 inch from the cut edge. We're actually folding our edges over 1/4 of an inch. And the area that we've cut off at the point is making a nice neat edge that's going to fold easily when we put our centers into these. Just get your next square, and just continue doing this until you have all the squares done. Now, if you're making a full-size quilt, you're going to want to just pull up a chair to your ironing board and get comfortable, because this does take a little bit of time for this part of the preparation. Please be careful with your ironing that you do not iron your bias squares out of square, because you know these bias edges are very delicate, and we want to keep our square nice and square. And we want a nice sharp point on these edges, nice sharp crease. If you need to, you can spray starch them afterwards to keep that crease nice and sharp. Now, if you can handle your tweezer with one hand and your iron with the other, this will go a lot more quickly for you, and it will save some burned fingers as well. Now we're ready to cut the centerpieces, and I have made a template out of template plastic. Our square needs to be cut the same size as the square that we have pressed. These are the same size. And then we're going to trim a little bit of the sides off so that we'll have a place for it to fit into the area where we're going to fold. I'm going to simply stack these up a little bit. I have 4 layers here. We're going to lie our template on top. And now I'm going to use my Quilter's silver marking pencil and just mark along the edge. Now we'll get our rotary cutter, and we can cut all of these at one time. We just need to get this straight grain cut off of here, because it's not going to allow our bias edge to fold over it too well. You know, that straight edge is rather rigid, and our bias edges are going to stretch nicely. So we need to get rid of the straight grain. And you will do the same number of centers as you have squares. Now we're ready to put our centers onto our square. We're going to use some glue stick to hold these in place while we begin our sewing. And we just need to put a little dab on each corner. We don't need a whole lot of glue stick. And we're going to position these in the middle. And get our tweezer to help put it in the position that we want it. Put it right underneath the fold of your fabric. These ends we're not going to really see because our fabric is going to be folded over the edges. And again, a little dab of glue stick. Once you get all of your centers positioned onto your squares, then you'll be ready to begin sewing.
We'll be right back after this.
Having an old piece redesigned is truly a personal experience. Wanda Dobbs at Main Street Jewelers in Piedmont knows that even the smallest piece of jewelry can mean a lifetime of memories. Wanda offers special savings on art-carved class rings, ruby and diamond anniversary bands, birthstone rings, wedding bands in wrap settings, and all ice rings. Specializing in personal service and custom design, Main Street Jewelers, downtown Piedmont, the little place where big memories begin.
I think being a reporter basically means making a lot of sacrifices. It's what the viewers want from us, even if it means getting a phone call at 3 in the morning that there's something breaking in Anniston. I really love this area and its people, and I really don't think people realize how much it means to me when they stop me and tell me how much they enjoy Channel 40. My job is stressful an awful lot, but I do look forward to the simple pleasures at the end of a very long day.
Kim Chapman, part of TV 40's home team. People you know, people who care. TV 40 News, your local news source.
Now we're ready to sew. We have our squares prepared with our little centers in them, and now we're going to start sewing. I'm using an open toe applique foot. This is foot number 20 on the Bernina. This is open in the middle, and this is going to allow me to be able to get in there with my tweezers and be able to fold the edge of my fabric over. I'm going to put our foot on. I'm also going to select stitch number 26. And I'm changing the width of that to about 3/4 of a millimeter width. I'm using invisible nylon thread, and this way we won't be able to see our stitches. The first thing I'm going to do is just stitch a few straight stitches on the end of this corner. This is going to give me a little tail to hold on to be able to get this little bitty corner started through here. Now, sometimes sewing with this invisible nylon is about like sewing with spider webs. It's so hard to see and it's so fine, you sometimes have difficulty knowing what to grab. Okay, here we go. Now I'm going to fold the first corner over. And I want to use my needle down button so that every time I stop, the needle will stop down. Now because this is on the bias, it just folds beautifully and tapers to the next corner. And when you need to pivot, just raise your presser foot and pivot. This particular stitch goes forward 1 stitch, and then it zigs over to the right, and then back in the same hole that it began. Now when you get down to these corners, I find it helpful to be able to use the tweezer to hold it straight. Now we're ready to put our next piece under. I'm going to first turn the corner and put it right behind the one that I'm just sewing. And once you get it started, it will just go right in behind. You're going to make a little chain of these little squares.
With all the traveling I do on the interstate and on the country roads back and forth, the entire market that we cover, one of the things I had to make sure is I had good quality, and I found it with Bell South Mobility and Southeastern Cellular.
My wife's a full-time student at Gaston State, and we live in Clay County. It's about an 80-mile drive. I want to make sure she was, had protection or anything. She broke down on the road or something, she can call me. It's come in handy already 3 times.
Call Southeastern Cellular today in Anniston, Gadsden, Talladega, Birmingham, and Tuscaloosa.
A live cancer cell. Watch as your body's own immune cells kill it. To us, it's just the beginning. The Cancer Research Institute funds research that's begun to make immunological treatment possible. To find out more, to support our work, call today.
Now we finished sewing all of our squares, and we're going to now position them onto our placemat or our quilt, whichever it is that you're making. And we just line these up. We want all of the points to touch, and we don't want them to overlap. We want them to just touch. Sometimes we have to manipulate these points around a little bit if they want to go a little bit crooked. Now we're going to secure them with a little glue stick, and just a little bit on the points will be sufficient. And just line them up. Once we have these positioned, we're ready to start our quilting. Now these are all secured down, and our points are touching and not overlapping. And I have layered this with my backing fabric, my quilt batting, and my top. Our placemat all sandwiched, we're ready to quilt. I'm using the walking foot, and this feeds the fabric evenly from the top and the bottom. I also still have my invisible nylon thread. We're going to use a straight stitch, and I'm going to use a 3 stitch length. I like to have my stitch length be about the same length as it would if it was a hand quilted quilt. And we're just going to start in one corner. And also using our needle down position, we're going to be stitching right along the same lines that we stitched before when we folded the fold of our fabric over our centers. Now we're looking for a continuous line to sew. We would like to stop and break our thread as few times as possible, and we'll be able to quilt this entire placemat without stopping. Be sure to lift your presser foot when you have to turn and reposition your fabric. We don't want to twist our batting and backing. Now that we have our placemat quilted, we're ready to put the binding on. Our binding is a piece of 1.5 inch wide fabric, and this particular one is cut on the bias. I cut it on the bias because of the way the design went. You would not necessarily need to cut this on the bias since we're just applying it to a rectangle. I'm going to first just fold the edge over and position it under my presser foot. And I'm still using my walking foot, and we're still using the invisible nylon. We want to stitch along the edge of this right up to our little points. Now we're using about 1/4 inch seam allowance, and so I'm going to stitch down to the end to within 1/4 inch of the edge. and I'm going to back stitch just a couple of stitches to secure it and remove it from under the presser foot. Now to miter this corner, I'm going to fold the fabric away from me at a 45-degree angle and then back towards me at a 90-degree angle. And again, we're just going to continue stitching till we come to the next corner. Now we're back to the beginning and we're just going to overstitch that a little ways. We're ready to trim it and turn our binding. Now you notice these nice, neat corners. When we turn them, they're beautifully mitered. It's like magic. Now we're going to turn our binding to the back and fold it over. Now, when I stitch the back of my binding, I do always do this part by hand.
Purchasing a new piece of jewelry or having an old piece redesigned is truly a personal experience. Wanda Dobbs at Main Street Jewelers in Piedmont knows that even the smallest piece of jewelry can mean a lifetime of memories. Wanda offers special savings on art-carved class rings, ruby and diamond anniversary bands, birthstone rings, wedding bands in wrap settings, and all ice rings. Specializing in personal service and custom design, Main Street Jewelers, downtown Piedmont, the little place where big memories begin.
Ooh, tell everyone you got to go, 'cause Oprah's on, she's starting the show. Oprah's on, Oprah's on, Oprah's on.
Oprah's on, telephone lines are burning. Drop what you're doing, make sure you're turning. Oprah's on, you got to see this. Oprah's on, something you can. It's 3 o'clock.
Where's everyone gone?
I know. Oprah's on.
Oprah Winfrey, weekdays at 3 p.m. right here on TV 40.
Now that we finished our cathedral window placemat, you can see how easy cathedral window quilting is when we do it by the machine. Thanks for joining us for this exciting project, and be sure to join us again next week for Heirlooms by Design.
Heirlooms by Design has been brought to you by Quilts Plus, your authorized Bernina dealer, and by Capital Imports. Thread racks on the set of Heirlooms by Design provided by Handcrafted Wood Products, Mobile, Alabama. For an expanded version of today's show on VHS videotape, send $29.95 plus $2.50 postage and handling to Lamonaco Designs, 1211 Noble Street, Anniston, Alabama, 36201. That's Lamonaco Designs, 1211 Noble Street, Anniston, Alabama, 36201. Be sure to ask for today's topic by name. Visa or MasterCard accepted. Sharon will be back with more Heirlooms by Design next week.
TV, Channel 40.
Have this charge re-aired by a desperate Clinton campaign.